Okay, happy Tuesday, everybody, on the subseasonal discussion. I'm honored to be able to help narrate this adventure as we try to work our way through the shoulder season when it gets a lot tougher to forecast. I've got a few slides to show you as well. So let me see if I get my share screen to work here. Um, from the sunny shores of Washington, D.C., as you can see there behind me, we're really enjoying our 60s and 70s that we're getting today. I can't wait to get outside and walk the dogs. All right, so can you see my screen okay? Is it? Yeah, okay. So definitely a challenging time right now. The 60 and 20 day is a real tough nut to crack because we've got so many different moving parts in the pattern. So I just wanted to start with a general overview of what the dynamic models are kind of showing right now. And on the upper left, I've got the CFS weeklies from overnight showing a pretty bland forecast, very close to climatology. You've got the GFS ensemble weeklies, which are eventually going to replace the CFS. They're that's going to eventually be the one to take over for the CFS, and that one's quite a bit warmer. And then the European weeklies from last night are on the far right for the 60 and 20 day, and they're kind of a blend of both. They've got some of the cooler signatures in the south and east that you see on maybe the CFS, and then they've got that strong north central warm signature that you see on the GFS ensemble weeklies. I will say, as you went into February, the GFS ensemble weeklies are probably the slowest to pick up on some of those colder changes that we saw, so it is a little bit more challenged there. But all of them kind of show kind of a mixed range. Now, it was really interesting. The European weeklies, they have 50 members, and so we kind of break them up into clusters, and it's kind of interesting. For the 16 to 20 day, 73% of them show what to me looks like an El Nino pattern, actually warm across the north, seasonal cool across the south, and then 27% have a big cold pattern. So for the end of the month to round it out. So definitely some noise out there toward the end of the month that we'll have to try to figure out. I was intrigued. We do pattern matches, and we looked at the 1 to 15 day 500 millibar pattern over the northern hemisphere to find the 10 years and dates that match closest to it over the entire 15-day window. We look at North America to do that, North Pacific and North America. And, they pretty much suggest the 16 and 20 days should be a warm pattern. You get some of that negative PNA signature that we're dealing with right now on the Northern Hemisphere view, but you get a broad, warm look on the other ones as well. Maybe the North Pacific is a little bit more of a gradient along the US-Canadian border, but it's not too much here. Now, if you look under the hood from these years, you do see some years that are a little bit on the cooler side. 2008 is in there. You've got 2019, but that's actually April date in there. But there's a few. 1989 was showing up a few times. It was a lead analog for the North Pacific, North America, and that one was again April, but it was one coming out of that really cold February like we just had. So, but for the most part, they're mostly warm. When you look at other factors, not looking at analogs or dynamic models, we are moving into tropical forcing MJO phase one. It's kind of messy. There's what we call split forcing. If Dr. Roundy were on the call, he'd be all over this, but kind of a split forcing situation where the majority of the forcing is being indicative of phase one, but there is some phase 4 and 5 forcing as well, which is a warmer signal in there. So it is a mixed phase situation, but the models have phase one almost the entire next 15 days. It kind of gets stuck in that phase. And if you look at a global wind that's slightly negative, just slightly reflective of a La Nina base state, it's kind of a cold pattern in the second half of March. These are dates looking at the second half of March. And then if you go a little stronger with the global wind to the negative side, you get a warmer signature, and that's kind of what we're starting to see on the models. The models start to really warm up next week, for example. I think partly because they were lowering the glam a bit more. And you can see the trend on the European ensemble over the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 model cycles has been going lower and lower and lower, and moving out of that slightly negative state into a more moderately negative state. And I think that's playing a role. This is the opposite of what happened in February, by the way. In February, we were having a rising glam, which was basically working against the typical La Nina base state. So we were able to really work against the typical warm La Nina February to get that response. Now in March, we're working in the opposite direction. And I think that's leading to some warmer risk to the forecast. It is interesting. The models are suggesting we might get to MJO phase 2 by the 16 to 20 day. Not a lot of dates with that when you're looking at the global wind range that I'm talking about here. So it's a very small sample size, but you get years like 2010, 2011 in there. It's kind of a mixed story. And then phase three, you get a colder look toward the end of the month, which is something that happened in, I'm looking at March 2011, had a little bit of something like this occur. So, so there was some cooler volatility risk showing up in some of this information. Now, if you take a step back and say, forget about the MJO, I don't, want to look at that. Let's just look at weak to moderate La Ninas for the second half of March. Typically, these are all the dates that qualify. There's 351 dates back to 1950. It's kind of a seasonal to cool look across much of the country, warm in Texas. If you filter it for weak to moderate negative global wind, you get a similar signature with about 107 days, about just under a third of the same amounts of cases there. So it is interesting. You do get there are routes to go for cooler forecast for the end of the month. Most of the data I've been looking at is on the warmer side, all this here, all this here. So, but there are some interesting routes that we'll have to watch from the tropical forcing standpoint that could, give us a little bit of trouble. So I did the ultimate hedge today in my forecast. I went right in between the 10 and 30-year normal. That's prior to February. That was the way the winter was going, basically. December and January were both generally between the 10 and 30-year for the most part, or at least it was, I think December didn't do it, but December, it was cooler than last year and then warmer than a 30-year normal. And so that's kind of where I went in between the 10 and 30-year for that. So that is my show anyway. Let me stop my share here. But anybody have any questions or anything? Anything I didn't look at maybe worth discussing?
I had a question about those MJO plots. Those are lag zero relationships?
Yes, they are. Well,
you also look at
yeah.
You lag non-zero relationships too, or
I
best results for lag zero?
I didn't. Yeah, but I know you guys have that nice grid on your page that that does show the some lag influences there as well. So no, that was pretty much lag zero, which is interesting in this situation because we're in MJO phase 1 starting today, and we're still there on day 15. So it's really stuck on that one for some reason this year. But no, that's a good point. Some of the lag stuff I think is sometimes more helpful, and I'll look at find that. That's on your site there, Dave.
Oh yeah, I can put it in the chat.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, thank you. It's tricky right now because it's a split forcing situation. So it's, some people could argue that phase 4 and 5 are still a little bit more dominant. I've been really intrigued by 2011 because in that year we had a big Texas cold outbreak. That was the last time the ERCOT grid was challenged like it was just 2 weeks, 2 or 3, well, it's been a month now almost. But so it's been a while, but that year's was interesting because it was kind of a weak to moderate La Nina, and we had split forcing in March as well. 4 and 5 and 1 were competing for most of that month, and so I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah, it looks like I'm looking at the phase 1 lags here, and it looks like it's actually mostly a warm signal from your data here. It's really interesting on the lag basis, and 16 to 20 day off of phase 1 out of March 1st. It gets really tricky as you go through the spring period because the wavelengths change every sets of 2 to 3 weeks. So, but looks like you've got it centered on March 1st there. Yeah, pretty.
But the other thing you see too, Matt, if you just go to like contemporaneous around, I guess it only goes through the end of March, but the real warm signals are, stronger 4, 5, 6. And I guess realistically, are we going to be it doesn't look like we're going to be there either. In other words,
yeah, there's still a little reflective convective activity in the Southeast Asia area, so it is still a conflicting signal, I think. But yeah, I still think going to one is introducing at least some cooler volatility. We've got a pretty decent snowstorm coming at the end of this week for Colorado. There might be a cold push into Texas at the end of next week. So we do have some colder variability in the mix with that split forcing. So I think it's still a dynamic pattern. It's difficult to say we're in a sustained warm or cold pattern at this time. So it's a pretty challenging 16 to 20 day, I think, today to try to gauge that. I had shown like the CFS was a little bit softer, and the Euro weeklies were a little softer as well. They tend to go a lot warmer by the time you get to the first week of April. So just beyond the 16 to 20 day window, they really start to crank up the warm pattern for early April. So that'll be something that we'll have to watch for as well. Whatever happens at the end of March doesn't look very durable. And I don't see any signs of durability either from a blocking standpoint. Nothing looks very impressive. There were some hints about maybe the final warming, stratospheric warming of the season maybe starting to show up across the North Pacific in some of these guidance points. And sometimes if they're strong enough, they could lead to some springtime blocking patterns. But that would be way down the road. I don't see anything really too important on that end either. And again, I don't see a whole lot of blocking support right now.
I did have a question about I looked at this a little bit, but you probably have more of a perspective on it. Can you talk a little bit about how recent forecasts have been verifying and what that might say about, the predictability for, say, the 11 to 20 day period? And specifically, like what I did look at, I think, is like this recent cold in the Northeast. And obviously it's moving out, but like the last 5 days, I don't think it was well predicted from 11 to 15 days out, like that we were going to have this 5 day period of pretty chilly weather.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that's all I know. So I'm asking you, like, from more of a national Eastern perspective, how have the forecasts been performing in your view over the last couple of weeks? And does that, again, with all the things you already talked about, the MGO being a little bit cranky or a little bit mixed, that's not a good word, kind of like
Mixed, yeah.
mixed signals. Does that say anything about the fact that we should expect lower skill, beyond day 10 or 15, or I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think lower skill for sure. There's a lot of debate on that issue as far as how the models have been doing lately. Since the big cold event of mid-February, the models really missed that last week of February being as warm as it was. And it was really interesting because I've seen that happen before when we had the big polar vortex event in 2015 and back in 2014. The one interesting thing about the models is they tended to underperform on the intensity of the cold event. But then the week following the event, as that vortex feature lifts out, they really underestimate the warming response. One issue tends to be snow cover, and there actually was snow cover in Texas, so they had trouble. They didn't warm Texas back up fast enough in the final week of February, so that was a big issue. That last week of February was forecast to be significantly colder than a 30-year normal, and it turned out to only be like 2 or 3 HDs over 30 years. So it was just barely scratched by a cold week. So that tilted everyone to thinking, well, it was a one and done deal mid-February, and that was it. And then now the models are going to keep missing to the cold side. But as you pointed out, that wasn't exactly true. We've had two events here in March now that have come in stronger than expected in the Northeast. There's 3 days that we had last weekend, as you're mentioning, and there was an event earlier last week as well, and the European actually did better than the American on picking up on those transient cold events. So I feel like it's a mixed bag. I feel like they definitely underestimated the warming behind the big cold outbreak, but at the same time, I feel like March so far has been mixed. One of my colleagues posted a degree day bias thing from our Storm Vista website just yesterday, and it showed that in general, over the last 2 weeks, the models have had a cold bias, but it hasn't been, and it's kind of encapsulating the verifications from the last week of February as well, and because that includes the last 2 weeks, and the European model has been less cold biased than the American, so it's down a little bit better, picking up on some of these things, I guess, but. Yeah, so it's a really challenging situation right now. I just think the lack of blocking, the lack of strong signals is going to make this a really difficult forecast going forward.
Hey, Matt, this is Dave D'Arcangelo.
Hey, Dave. Pretty good.
Good. So you touched on something that we mentioned last week, Dave. You might recall this, which is regards to some recent cold outbreaks. This has been a hallmark of the last, say, maybe decade or more, which is that these really strong cold outbreaks, not that they're not happening with some regularity, but that they are shorter lived and are less well supported in terms of duration and durability. We noticed that with the late January 2019 outbreak in the Midwest. And then obviously there was a significant cold surge around New Year's of 2017, 18. And then you mentioned the winters of 14, 15. Seems like that's a true hallmark of the climate system right now. That we're not able to maintain durability, even though we can get extreme events to occur still. Something you've probably noticed, or would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, very true. I mean, even the polar vortex winter of 13, 14, a lot of folks forget it, but it drove us bonkers as forecasters. But even in the 13, 14 winter, every single month was colder than a 30-year normal, but there was always a blowtorch week in there. There was always one week that everyone said winter was over. November, December, January, February, it was just amazing. There was always a week where the whole pattern just broke down and had to be rebuilt again. And so, yeah, your point about lack of durability, even in that coldest winter since 2001, we still didn't have what I would call durability. We still kept flipping the script once a month at least. And you're right. I mean, I think the last time we had a durable cold pattern, in my view, was probably 10, 11 and 09, 10. That's when we had the record blocking. I think it was both of those two winters, the NAO and the AO were negative all the months, I think, pretty much, except for maybe that one February of 11 or something like that. But it was impressive, and that was the last time. So it was over a decade ago that we had durable. Now I felt like we almost got closer this year because we had a more persistent negative NAO. We had Europe with some impressive cold. We had a negative AO for decent Jan, which gave us a decent cold into Asia for a little while and stuff. So we had a little bit more durability this year, not in North America as much, but we did in other parts of the globe. But it's been a long time since we've had a durable cold space state. We've done really well with durable warm-based states. We've gotten them quite a few times. So
Sure.
it's yep.
So this winter's hallmark might be the fact that while North America wasn't cold, with the exception of 2 or 3 weeks in February, there was not a lack of cold hemispherically, right? You mentioned obviously the late December, early January Asia surge, which was significant. Europe had a spell. Western Russia was significantly cold for a long stretch.
Yeah.
This year was challenged by the placement of it and the maintenance of those places. There wasn't a lack of cold to be had, though, right? There was significant cold, as my point, right?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, definitely significant cold air supply. This reminded us of the 12-13 winter, where you had both Europe and Asia saw significant cold events prior to the U.S. getting one finally in February of 2013. We were pretty warm prior to that point, and so it was very similar to that winter's progression. That was a Q1. That was a weak La Nina, and it had a lot of similarities in terms of who got cold first, and it was also a big stratospheric warming event in early January of that year, like there was this year as well. So yeah, that's been an interesting analog. But like you say, it was no lack of cold air supply. In fact, I think it was just yesterday NOAA just came out with their rankings, and I think February was gosh, it's only the 9th though. I can't believe they had the global rankings yet, but I think it was at least January was, number 7 or 8 in terms of warmest on record. So it really fell back from what we've been seeing in recent years, with some really record warm Northern hemisphere or total planetary warmth. It did pull back quite a bit, a lot of mid-latitude cold, thanks to the negative AO that we had in both December and January.
Sure. But despite that negative AO, we still had substantial ice cover build over the Arctic. And I saw, like you said, it wasn't as cold. It kind of halted the extreme warmth we've seen in recent winters in terms of the ice cover as well. I think it's only like maybe the 8th or 9th least coverage. There's been many years in the last decade and a half which have had much less ice coverage at the end of February.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that it had gotten up that much too. That's interesting. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm looking at the Northern Hemisphere ice extent for February, and it's definitely it perked up a little bit. In fact, the last 2 years have. So yeah, it was an interesting winter, that's for sure. We definitely had some cold air on the board to talk about, and finally got at least one delivery. So, but yeah, definitely a challenge to forecast.
Sure. And Dave, I know we mentioned last week, I think Matt would agree with this too, from a market standpoint, had this a cold event occurred in December, it's a far different impact to the to the the macro view of winter than getting an event in the latter third really of winter. And I think Matt can be sympathetic to that idea as well.
Oh yeah, for sure, 100%. One interesting thing about this February was from a Texas standpoint is it turned out to be, I think, the third coldest Texas February on record for the month of February, and it replaced 1989, which we all know 1989, but we know 1999 for December of 1989. But it turned out that February of 89, preceding the December of 89, was a top 3 cold Texas February. So, and that was a situation where you were in a La Nina based state, and the La Nina kind of lingered into the summer and into the fall. It was like negative neutral weak La Nina into the fall of 1989. And then we got what Dave was talking about, then a more impactful December occurred. At that point. So it would be pretty crazy if this was just a precursor and not a one-off here. So I'll have to watch that 89 analog closely over the summer. That was an interesting one though. It was a dead summer. It wasn't very exciting, weather.
Matt, I have a feeling you gave us a preview of winter 21-22. Is that right?
Maybe. I just thought it was funny that year showed up 89. But,
no, I saw that too. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah. Why not? 16 to 20 months out. But yeah, that's it's pretty crazy, but it would be a lot more impactful to the gas markets, especially. I mean, this event in February was really big for the power markets. I mean, we were getting hit quite a bit by ERCOT power traders. They were very concerned about that event, and that was where a majority of our consultation was. But we did have a lot of gas folks that were concerned about freeze off risk in West Texas, the pipelines, getting the wellhead freeze offs and being a concern there. And so there was some gas interest for sure, but it was definitely a utility focused thing. The gas folks have been a lot more excited if that were December instead of February. Because there's always the whole thing about gas is, how much are we going to have in storage when we go into the spring? It will be an interesting spring this year, though. I think weather may matter a little bit more because of the large draws on LNG and everything for Europe and Asia. I think every shipment that they had available this winter was spoken for. So there's going to be a really strong push to rebuild the LNG setup for next winter. There's going to be a lot of demand for that, and that would make the U.S. injections, I guess, less impressive maybe this summer. So maybe a little bit more weather sensitive if we get some big heat waves or anything, or some later spring cool outbreaks or anything like that, like in April 2018 or something, which we're not calling for. But I mean, something like that, could affect the injection season a little bit more than it normally would. So we'll keep weather in play. I think it's worth to keep tracking it and everything. Definitely February woke everybody up a little bit. What was everyone else's thoughts on the 16 to 20 day? I mean, is it like a hedge like I did, or was there anyone had a strong feeling to the warmer cold side?
Hey, Matt, if you want, you can pull up the board.
Let's do that. Yeah, let me share my screen.
And while that's coming up, I guess I could talk about my forecast since mine's.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because I always just basically turn the CPC number or map into a number. And it was interesting. Actually, the CPC discussion pretty much agreed with what you were showing. They mentioned, overall they're forecasting warmth. The probabilities aren't as high as I think last week's probabilities were, but they did mention in their discussion there was a risk of some cooler air, especially in the north and the northeast. And so they had equal chances actually over the northeast. And so for that reason, considering, Miami's not really contributing HDDs this time of the year, go too warm in my forecasts to account for the possibility of some cold air in the areas of populated areas that do have HDDs this time of the year. So I'm a little bit, I think, below some of the longer term numbers, but not too far below. Yeah, 82.2.
Oh yeah, you're at the top. Yeah,
So I'm
looking down at the bottom.
bit.
Yeah, always my normals are a little different than yours. So that wasn't too far off, I guess. I was 88 for 30 years, so that's pretty close, and 82, 83 on 10. So I ended up at 85 in between the two. And so you went 90, Dave, and the other Dave 88. Yep. So interesting. 86. We're all pretty tight in there. There's not too big of a spread right now. Philip 86.4. Lanza went a warmer route there. So I agree with that. Day 15 teleconnection extrapolation. That was there's not a lot of really impressive teleconnections right now. Something that's going to have to change in the 11 to 15 day to make it more aggressive. And then using that blend makes sense too. That give you a bit of a warmer answer as well. Yeah, pretty interesting.
Hey, Matt, I have a question. Uh, I'm just thinking a little bit still about what you and Dave were talking about, and it's like so yeah. Tell me to tell me to get back on track if you want, but uh, you guys talked about how we had really good cold air availability in the northern hemisphere. We had an AO that was negative, like Michael's on the line here. Michael talked about for a while, and we had the AO negative for a long time, right? If you look at the
Yeah.
composite, the 90-day composite, I put the 90-day composite there in the chat. You see a big negative AO. We had a La Nina SST state anyway, which typically means that some good cold air will have a chance to get at least into the middle part of the country for decent periods.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess when you look at I think the 30-year HDD for D through Feb, it was still, I think, a little, even despite the Feb, it was still a little bit warmer
It
than
was. Yep.
than 30-year. So I guess my question is, um, a comment in a question, and feel free to refute my first comment. It seems like what was missing in part was more sustained anomalous ridging near around the Gulf of Alaska, somewhere there,
Mm-hmm.
that we didn't have more periods of that to get that cold here for more periods. And looking back now, with the ability to play Monday morning quarterback a little bit, when you look at the tropical forcing, the strat, all the features that you normally look at, what stands out to you that says, well, hey, if this had evolved differently, if and again, I'm making an assumption. You could tell me you don't think it had anything to do, but like, hey, if the tropical forcing set up here instead of there, or maybe just synoptic forcing, whatever it was, that this winter could have turned out much differently based on the fact that, again, we had some of those ingredients that you normally want to have to set
Yeah.
up for a cold winter.
No, it didn't work. Yeah, I think I mean, I feel like like you just said, I think it's the tropical forcing part that just did not work out. That's interesting. I'm not getting this. What have I done wrong? Um, I'm not getting I was going to show you a Hofmahler, but it's not generating for some reason. I have to go check with the developers on that. Something went wrong. But on the MJO side, here's December 1st through Feb 28, and you could see this is the core winter here, and most of the forcing was on this side over this side here. We didn't get any time between Jan East 1 and Feb 28 with forcing near the date line, for predominant forcing anyway.
Wow.
Certainly mixed forcing, but it was all on the other side. So yes, you had some blocking support, but you didn't get good tropical forcing support. So like you said, we didn't get the Alaska ridging as persistent or dominant. There was just this one window in late January when we spiked in the fate, and also everything was weak. You see, it's all weak forcing, but only here in late January into early February, we had the spike in the 6 and 7. And I wanted to show on the Hofmahlers, but some of that forcing in 7 did reach closer to the date line, phase 8. You saw that here. And it was really interesting. And that was what really seemed to set up the pattern for mid-February to give us that cold outbreak. But that was the closest we got. And I don't know if I can do Jan 15 to Feb 15, just to give you a better idea of that in there. But yeah, we just never, so the end is, so Feb 15 only got to there. So it was later in the period that it kind of went back, but that was the strongest point of the MJO intensity. And I had done some looking at phases 6 and 7 in late January with La Nina based state with a global wind that was working against the La Nina based state. And I did get a colder signal at that point. So I felt, we had relatively colder February forecast going into February, but we were nowhere near cold enough. We missed it by about 95 HDDs. But we had started to cool off our February outlook in late Jan and our seasonal outlooks, because we had, we saw some signs that maybe something was trying to set up, but we were nowhere close to as cool as we needed to be for that. But that was it. I think that was just getting some tropical forcing support, which that's very difficult to figure out in the season ahead. We look at things like SST anomalies and things like that, but 2 years ago it was the record warm Indian Ocean, I think, that really played a big role in how tropical forcing played out 2 winters ago and made it so much warmer than expected. And this situation, we had stratospheric warming, we had tropospheric, propagation to the troposphere. We had significant blocking, but we just didn't have the Pacific support, and until the very end. So yeah, I agree. That was the missing link this year. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dave? Or
No,
yeah,
that honestly, I hadn't. I love. Well, first of all, yeah, great assessment. I hadn't seen that recap of the sort of
yeah,
MJO since December, so that was really interesting. I didn't realize that there was no
yeah,
cycles into phase
no,
8-1. Uh, and I think you bring up a really interesting research question, which is to say, is there any predictability in that, in this type of La Nina, to say that, back in November that, hey, we're going to have, we're not, we're going to see a higher frequency, even if you can't predict it exactly, but that we're going to see a much higher frequency in those, 3, 4, 5, 6 versus the 8, 1,
mm-hmm.
2s, right? Because if you knew that, right, most meteorologists probably, if they know that in
Yep.
November, you're right. They would think about
You'll
things
be able to have your
differently.
base state and
So,
everything. That's really interesting. 2012,
right.
2013 had a more robust MJO circuit. You could see that here. You actually did get some dateline forcing, and we ended up with that. We had a warm December, Jan, and a cold February that year, but we had a more robust MJO that year. It was a little bit more maybe predictable. I don't know, but this year was definitely more confined to the warmer phases. Made it really challenging. I was curious to see what last year's was. 1920 it was just whipping strongly in the warm phases, and just kept looping at Southeast Asia there, really missing colder side, just kind of coming off of the IO forcing right on into Southeast Asia, looked like. It was challenging, that's for sure. Like I say, we had some interesting pieces in place. We at least got a little bit of a volatility out of that, but it wasn't enough to dominate this winter. And again, this winter, um, because we had weaker IO forcing and stuff, our forecasters were thinking that this winter, our theme for this winter was warmer than normal but colder than last year, and that was the general baseline that we walked into the winter with. And I think that idea has worked out fairly well. Even with the warmer December, January periods, it was still cooler than last year's super torch warm situations there. And we didn't have the record IO, and we didn't have we had a little bit of a La Nina based state versus the El Nino the previous year, so you had a little bit of hints there of some cooler volatility, at least to reduce the super warm anomalies of the prior year. But that's about the best of it. We can't really, I don't think there's a lot of skill in long lead seasonal prediction of prevailing, tropical forcing states. Jason Lynn or somebody may contradict me on that, but I think it's definitely still a frontier, still a challenge.
And have we seen that? Do you have some of the other La Nina years? I'm just curious, is that
it's the most recent La Nina year. Let's at 1718 was the one before this one. So
right.
that one had a really robust MJO cycle too. Yeah, this is really interesting. It definitely, what was the one before that? Was it 1617 was a little bit of one, wasn't it? Don't want to accidentally.
07, 8, okay.
Yeah, there's 07,
Wow.
08. 2009 was 08, 09 was a weaker
Yeah.
La Nina. That one was very heavy in the same side as this year, but we had that one surge over the dateline forcing. These were cold prevailing winters. Both 07, 08 and 08, 09 had more blocking over, not 07, 08 as much. 08, 09 had more blocking influences, and again, more robust. So yeah, very suppressed. One interesting one is 05, 06. Let me look at that one real quick here.
That was the cold start to the winter, cold December.
Yeah,
that transitioned into one of the warmest Januaries on record.
It was, yeah. And we didn't get our cold December this year with it, but I was curious because 2006 was the last time we actually had a February that was physically colder than a January in terms of gas weighted US heating degree day accumulation. It's been 15 years since we actually had a February that was physically colder than the January before it. So irrespective of normals, just total accumulation of degree days. So, but yeah, it was robust
Yeah,
again.
I was just gonna say, looking at this, like, I think, yeah, another research question for folks on the line too is just, yeah, it doesn't, why didn't we get good circuits into, the Western Hemisphere this year? What was it?
Yeah.
Because clearly we've seen other La Nina years where you've gotten, much better progression into phases 8, 1, 2, but this year we didn't, and it's not. Yeah, I don't have the answer. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I'm not a tropical expert by any means, but I do remember, I do read the CPC discussions, the week 3, 4 discussions when I come up with my forecast. And I do recall them mentioning from time to time that there was other tropical forcing that's not the MJO.
Okay. Yep.
What the name would be for the other, but there was other stuff going on in the tropics that seemed to be perhaps more important than the MJO, or maybe sometimes it would show up as a pseudo MJO, but really wasn't the MJO. There was something else.
Oh, interesting.
In
Yeah.
the tropics.
Huh.
But other than that, I can't get into any more specifics.
Yeah.
And into it myself. I just remember sometimes the CPC discussing there's other tropical forcing that was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, especially when you have a mixed forcing, the MJO is not a strong signal. There's, I think there's still a lot of research to be done in terms of dominant forcing influences and everything like that. We look at the global wind oscillation to get an idea sometimes, but yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot more to be done on it. I did show 99-2000 here, which was a La Nina as well. And that one was tracking really good at the beginning of the winter. November of 99 was very close to November of 2020. And that one was a pretty good match. And it actually, it was pretty much in the same areas. If you were to use this as your benchmark for most of the winter, I think you would have done pretty well. I can't remember if February 2000 had a surprise cool push or not, but I know it was a warmer than normal month, I think. So it didn't work out from that standpoint. I don't think it had a big stratospheric warming in early Jan either, but in general, it had a very similar feel to it, which of course was right before December of 2000 as well. The following year. So here we go. I'll predict December of 2089 for you today. But that was an interesting one there too. We had 3 La Ninas in a row in the late 90s. They were very, very warm winters. 99 was more traditional everywhere kind of thing. And in 1998 had issues with the Super Nino hangover. Actually, this is wrong. This is 97, 98. So I already gone too far, but anyway, yeah. So that was interesting. I think if you had to go back through and find a La Nina that's closest, I think 99-2000 would be your winner, and you would have gotten most of the months right, I think, with that. I wonder. I don't have good stratospheric warming history on CWG. I think I have some on Star Vista for it, but I don't have. I always like this look here. I was curious to see if they had a. Yeah, so they didn't have a big early January SSW. There was a little one early February. It was a bigger one in March. Yep, the final warming. We had a pretty robust one this year. This whole thing. It's interesting. Usually the second piece is a little bit more robust. This one here, and that didn't work out this year, as we were talking about with the AO a few weeks ago. We didn't get that extra little nudge. We have the NAO going back negative. The AO did go negative briefly last week, but it was a lot weaker. We have a sudden stratospheric cooling that's now affecting our pattern.
Philip or Michael, do you guys have any thoughts on the forecast, or want to share your forecast?
So something I noticed that is sort of related to the discussion is I took a quick look at our verifications from the last 3 heating seasons. And what's funny is despite the tricky forecast this year, it seems like everyone overall did much better this year in terms of the heating season compared to the last or the previous heating seasons, which I thought was not exactly what I would have expected given the different curveballs thrown at us this winter.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm surprised by that as well. I think maybe the warm prevailing pattern in December and January were stable enough for us to feel comfortable with the forecast. I don't know, but maybe there were a lot of false alarms last winter. It seems to me like there were a lot of false alarms last winter where the models kept trying to put a Alaska ridge in place, get everyone excited, and then it didn't verify. So, a lot of models underestimate the Pacific energy. But yeah, it's very interesting observation.
Yeah, and that's a good point by Matt too. It would be interesting to measure sort of like what I think they do this in certain sporting contests with the level of difficulty kind of thing. Like was this year, as I think, like, and Dave D'Arcangelo said this too, for the first half of the winter, you could argue the level of difficulty was easier. The weather was less volatile. Matt said last year a lot more volatile, or harder to predict. So did that play a role in in our improved skill this year?
Yeah, I don't feel like I got any better. So I'm gonna blame the weather on it. So
I just got older. I don't know.
I know, right? Oh man.
And just to add another data point, look, and in addition to looking at performance to normal, if you look at directionally correct, we are way better this year in terms of directionally correct compared to last year overall.
Yeah.
Last year, everyone was pretty close to the 50 line or even below the 50 line. This year, it seems most people are above the 50 line. And we actually have positive score on their performance for a change.
Very good. Yeah, I feel like it still kind of ties back to we had so many false alarms last year.
How about the
This is something
model
else.
skill, Philip? Oh, if you want to look at it, Matt, I haven't updated those, but if you go back to the other
Oh my gosh. I'm
page
stuck.
we're at,
Oh, let me go back to home.
yeah, then
This one,
performance.
weekly seasonal.
Yeah, the weekly. I know it's not super intuitive, but
Oh.
if you do these summaries up top, that's where Philip, I think, is looking. Those
Yeah.
summary buttons.
Mm,
Yeah, and then you can look at some of those and see.
I got you.
So Philip, did you look at that in terms of the ECM WCFS, how they compare it to like last year or whatever?
I think in general, the EC CFS were also better this year compared to the previous seasons, or at least at the very least, the CFS has been way better this season, although it looks like its skill's been dropping off in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah, like I was only at 50% directional. Yeah, interesting. Huh.
One thing I'll also add, I don't know, is that if you were forecasting just using the teleconnections this year, you wouldn't have done particularly well, in my opinion, because the NAO and the AO being so negative for so long, you would think, oh, that's screaming cold, but it really wasn't, as gung ho cold as you would think, and the only reason I'm just kind of seeing my score there, the only reason it looks that good is I missed some of the really bad forecasts.
Yeah, the number of forecasts.
But overall, I would say the teleconnections were not a good indicator of cold this year, at least not in higher demand regions.
That's a good point too, because if you're just playing like, hey, give me the big signals and I'm going to make an early prediction, you could have looked at this winter like 2010-11, right? Big La Nina, and hey, AO is going to be negative most of the winter. I mean, that's one of the first winters that comes to mind. 2010-11, right?
Yep.
Big La Nina, negative AO, and boy, was it a cold, we talked about earlier, cold winter. But no, that obviously that's not enough, right? There were other factors involved.
Yep, no doubt. I wonder. I didn't look at that one. I looked at all the other ones, but I didn't look at that one. The interesting thing about that one was, we had a kind of a milquetoast November, but we went out the gate. December was cold, so it was well, it was a lot of circle of death activity there, but there was one solid wave there too. Huh, interesting. I thought it'd be a little bit more
And
aggressive.
I would say it's more what's the word, like symmetric around the middle as opposed to
Yep. That was
asymmetric.
asymmetric this
Like, you
year.
know what I mean?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
that, and that it might be subtle, but that is definitely shifted
Uh-huh.
to the left
Yep.
versus the
Yep.
other
No
one.
doubt
Yeah.
about it. Yeah. Yep. You had more constructive forcing areas that you didn't have this year.
And frankly, it might have been like a game of inches here in terms of nonlinear impacts, right? The difference between, I mean, when you pull up, if you don't mind, Matt, can you pull up that 90-day link that I put in the chat
yeah,
there?
hang on one second. Go back to there.
And as Matt's pulling it up, I mean, the point there is that you see the 500 millibar hemispheric from the last 90 days. And as we talked about, you see like the mid-Pacific ridging, but if it's pretty mid-Pacific as opposed to Gulf of Alaska. And, you wonder, right, if things had shifted a little bit more, like 2010, 11, if we'd gotten a little bit more bumps into the
That's
Gulf
not
of
what
Alaska, could this have
you're.
been much different? Oh, no, that
The
last
hang
one?
on.
Yeah.
So funny. The chat pops up into a whole different window and
Oh.
adventure. This one.
There's one more after that even. That's the
Ah.
temperature. Or maybe, did I not?
There's one
Maybe I
before
didn't
that.
put it
Let
in
me
there.
just.
I thought I tried to put like a 90-day
Yeah, that was
pattern.
90.
Maybe it
Surface
wasn't.
temperatures 90-day anomaly. Yeah. Check your chat box there. See if I'm missing something.
Oh, maybe here. Let's try this one.
See if I could
There we
train
go.
my
How about
browser
that
to. Oh, there we go. Yep. Huh. Wow. Yeah. Look at that. Sheesh. That was impressive blocking on the Atlantic side. It really was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what
I
else
know,
could you
right?
want, right? Like, I mean, right? If you told me you're going to give me that,
Yeah.
if I want a cold
Yep.
winter and you're
I
giving
know.
me that,
Yeah.
I'm going to say thank you very much. I'll take it.
Eh,
But
Yeah.
yeah, maybe again, like just the game of inches here.
Mhm.
If the tropical force had just been a little bit different, that ridging north
Yep.
of Hawaii, yeah,
Yep.
exactly. In the means, maybe that gets shifted just a little bit
Mhm.
north and east,
Yep.
and it's a much different.
Yeah. And
It's more like 2010,
in
11.
10,
I don't know.
11, it was, if I remember correctly, it was a very negative WPO. It was very over this way, more the ridge. And then, more like 13,
Yeah,
14 was more of an EPO sort of story. But there was,
yeah,
you'd have it
yeah,
somewhere up there and you just didn't get it. There's just a really interesting, strong jet look coming out off of Asia there. So, and that's another
yeah.
interesting thing too, is that you did have some decent troughs in Asia. Sometimes that helps to ripple. You usually don't get the extended trough like this all the way across. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was a challenge. Yep. They had a decent cold winter in Western Canada. Yeah, I mean that's and it has been 11 years since we've had blocking this strong over the Greenland area. The negative NAO and negative AO combination, you have to go back to 10, 11 to get something that strong in the core winter period. There's nothing since the 13, 14 case, the 14, 15, that was all positive NAO. It never came on board. So, if you're looking for a cold winter, you still have to get both sides of the equation. You still got to get the Atlantic blocking and the Pacific side blocking. And yeah, this only got one half of the story this year.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, right? It wasn't as you mentioned. There's a lot of interesting regional stories still from this winter, and even in the Northeast. And I don't. I'm not speaking from like hard numbers. You and Dave Darkangelo probably have the harder numbers, but I think folks who up here in the Northeast, especially a little bit north of Matt, it's since February 1st.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I remember such a sticky period now, up until today, basically,
Yeah.
like 35 days since February 1st, a snowstorm where, I mean, it's been like almost every day cold. I mean, it's just, even when it's warmed up, it's been a slow, gradual warm up.
Yeah.
And I mean, we still have significant pockets of snow.
Oh,
Like,
well, yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's grass now, but I mean, it's been because it turned to ice. We had like 4 layers that got
Wow.
compacted. And I can't remember when we've had this much snow stay for this long. Like
Yeah.
it's been a really interesting 35-day period.
Yeah.
Regionally up here. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, certainly. You guys were the story versus us down in DC. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
How
even
much snow have you had?
Oh God, 5 inches maybe the whole
Okay, yeah,
season. So
yeah.
yeah, we're really low. But that is an interesting point. Is even today here in DC, we're going to be in the mid to upper 60s, and that's the warmest temperature we've experienced in mid December. So it's been three months since we've
Yeah.
experienced something this warm. So it's been a while. It certainly wasn't like last winter where we would get these huge bursts of record-setting warmth and things like that. We didn't get that. But it wasn't. It wasn't a super cold winter or any stress. Like you say, it's still going to be verified slightly warmer than normal for a good chunk of the Midwest into the east. So, but it was interesting anyway, and glad everyone did pretty well this year. That was great.
Well, Matt, was there anything else? We don't have to go to 11:30. So, is there anything else that you wanted to share, or
I think that's about it. I can't think of anything else at this point, unless anyone else has any other questions or anything.
yeah, anyone else on the line have any questions for Matt or anything like that? Otherwise, we can give 5 minutes of your life back.
Well, thanks for having me. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's good talking to you all, and good talking to you, Dave, and both Daves, and Dr. Decker. It was great, and Michael and Philip. Thanks for all contributing. So it's great talking to everybody.
Thank
And
you,
Matt,
Matt. Appreciate
Matt,
it.
Matt, just
Thank you.
last thing. We do have you now, like on a rotation,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
when should we expect to see you again?
The second week of April, I guess. So
Okay.
probably the 13th. So that works great.
So be prepared to pepper Matt with all your summer outlook
Yeah.
questions because
Yeah.
we'll
We're
probably
shifting
be
gears.
yeah, exactly by that point.
I was looking to see when does Texas get hot, because that's going to be a real big issue for them, given the fragile state of their utility. So, but they get their first 90-degree day typically in Dallas by the end of April, and then 95 by the end of May. So, we still have a ways to go, but by the time we get to April, we could be talking about some heat out there. So find some summer to talk about. Yep.
All right, that was a good teaser.
Yep.
So
Yep.
stay tuned for the second week of April.
Get off the shoulder here. All right, you guys have a good one. Great
Thanks,
talking.
Matt.
Thanks, you too.
Bye,
Bye.
Take
guys.
care. See ya.